I will now switch to English, and this is because our next speaker here today, our first keynote speaker, is Cate Trotter. And I had the fortune to listen to her this summer, an engaging presentation, and I'm already looking forward to hear this presentation she's going to give shortly. Cate is a great visionary, an engaging speaker. She has a clear grasp of the challenges experienced by today's business. And she quickly translates any daunting or challenging technical topics into plain English or plain strategies. Today, she will talk about selling to serving, and I think that's an interesting title, where she will talk about how companies need to communicate, build trust, and also develop their relationships in B2B environments, and basically what we can learn from the B2C world as well. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce, very welcome, Cate Trotter on stage.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Cate, and we're going to be talking about one important shift in attitude that can transform your business. And in order to demonstrate how other businesses are bringing this to life, I'm going to be using fresh approaches from B2B and B2C companies. Now, why should we care about any of this? Well, essentially, the market is getting more competitive. There's a range of B2C businesses that understand that they can quite easily grow the size of their business by also targeting the B2B market. At the same time, it's easier than ever for anyone to start a new business that could rival yours. So in Britain, there are now more UK businesses starting up than ever. The number of new businesses is at an all-time high. And in America, the number of new businesses is almost at the levels they were before the financial crash in 2007. So the market's more competitive. At the same time, your decision makers have less time than they did before. 46% of B2B decision makers say that they're overwhelmed by the amount of content available, and a third of them say that they have less time for reading and research than they did before. So it's essentially harder for your business to stand out. In and amongst all of this, people are questioning why they should trust businesses. Around the world, trust in businesses is at an all-time low. 52% of customers now say they trust businesses. So it's not looking good. That's every other person essentially saying that they don't trust businesses like yours and mine. And it's not just that that customers don't necessarily trust your business. It's also that they don't necessarily care about your business either. Only 29% of customers say that they feel engaged with the B2B companies that they work with. So this can seem like a bit of an uphill struggle. But in and amongst all of this, there are some real opportunities, and perhaps some things are easier to do than you might think. Because I'm sure you're all working on your marketing and your customer experience. But what if I told you that you could make a few changes in terms of your attitude and your execution to increase your turnover by 50% and increase your profits by 34%? That's what's at stake here. Now, who am I to tell you all of this? As I said, my name is Cate Trotter. I'm the head of trends for a small trend spotting business. We're based in London, but we do a lot of traveling. We meet people from all over the world, and that's really why we're called Insider Trends, because as you will see, we do a lot of desk research, but wherever possible, we try to experience all the initiatives that we talk about. And we also go off and interview the people who we believe are creating the future, because essentially there's no better way of understanding what's coming next than to talk to the people at the forefront of this. And these are some of the people who we help, and we also help people like you as well. So the things, to go into a bit more detail, the things we're going to talk about are initially the state of play within B2B and some simple ways to get ahead, and essentially why the whole industry needs to shift its mindset from selling to serving. And then we'll go on to look at some case studies from a variety of different businesses. So looking at the state of B2B, we can go back to a little bit more data because we came across an interesting survey that looked at the top turnoffs amongst B2B buyers. The top 4 are firstly, vendors talk too much about themselves and don't get to know the buyer's business. Secondly, they act more like vendors than partners along a journey. Thirdly, they don't provide the buyer with objective information to frame their decision. And the fourth one, they're too transactional and don't seem interested in a relationship. So it's interesting to see it broken down in this way. And I think roughly if you add up all of these things, this converts into about 80% of B2B buyers have an issue with one of these things. But when I looked at this, one thing stood out to me, which is really there's one root cause to all of these things. And that root cause is essentially that vendors are being selfish. They're putting themselves before their clients. And they're really just thinking about themselves, what they're going to get out of this relationship. And buyers are tired of this. Another survey we found put this even a simpler way by saying that 75% of buyers just want the sales messages to stop. Essentially, they're looking for an entirely different relationship with the businesses they work with. So one that's based more on perhaps shared goals and working together to achieve goals rather than trying to fight with people who are trying to sell to them whether it's actually in their interests or not. And this really pays it pays to change your mindset and this attitude. There's a Gallup survey that observed that B2B businesses who have high customer engagement scores are 33% more likely to be the first choice for the next wave of vendor partnerships that the business is looking at. And that can then translate into 50% higher revenue and sales and 34% higher profitability. Now, can you just put your hand up for me if you work for a business that turns over more than €1 million? Very good. Good few people. Okay, and just of those people, can you put your hand up for me again if you would like to be part of your business adding €500,000 or more to your turnover? Does that sound attractive? So everyone, okay, very good. So this is why this matters. And it's not that hard, really. High customer engagement comes when the vendor actively gets to know the client, the people in their business and their challenges and their aims, the things they're working towards. And when they understand that, they can then actively take a role in helping them achieve their goals. And that's what translates into this high customer engagement. You can also improve engagement by improving your digital experience. And in a lot of cases, it pays to look to B2C examples or B2C businesses, because McKinsey did a survey where they went off and objectively measured what they call the digital savviness of different businesses, and they found that overall B2C businesses are further along this maturity and sophistication curve compared to B2B ones. What was also interesting about this survey is that they found that it doesn't take that much to enter the top quartile or top 25% of businesses. You don't need to be perfect. All you need to do is essentially get about 50% of things right or more. And if you can do that, then again, that can transform your business. They found that B2B businesses that were in this top 25% had revenue growth of an average of 4.3% a year, which is 5 times higher than the B2B industry average. And it gets even better when we look at operating profit. They found that these digital leaders had this growth, operating profit growth of 13.5% a year, which is way better than the industry average. They found that the average business shrank or their profits shrank by 1.8% a year in this same period. So I know which side of the coin I'd rather be on, but that is an increase of 8 times. Again, well worth doing. Now, this doesn't have to be that complicated. This can be simply a case of observing your clients' behaviors, observing how they interact with you, and gearing interactions around that. This is a different McKinsey report where they found that over 90% of B2B buyers use a mobile device at least once during the decision-making process. So far, so unremarkable. But what is remarkable is that fewer than 10% of B2B companies say they have a compelling mobile strategy, which I just find amazing, really. But the point is that here, this is such an easy way for you to get ahead. If you can sit down, you can map out a solid mobile strategy, possibly take some simple steps to implement that, almost immediately you can enter the top 10% of B2B businesses and start getting ahead of your competitors. B2B businesses or B2B customers are also more like B2C customers than you might think, in that, well, you can't go to any retail conference at this point without everyone talking about omnichannel constantly. And it's getting to the same point within B2B because yet another McKinsey survey found that on average, a B2B customer will use around 6 different interaction channels throughout their journey. So that could be things like in-person meetings, going to stands on trade shows, phone calls, webinars, emails, email newsletters, all of these different things. But again, there's a really easy way that you can get ahead because they also say that 65% of these buyers say they're going to be frustrated by inconsistent experiences. And there are now simple tools that can help businesses gather information about what customers are doing through each of these channels, gather this into a central database, and then reuse it to optimize that same customer's experience when they next interact with your business, regardless of which channel they're going to interact with you through. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. But now, so I think that's mainly the stats done. So now we can move on to look at a few examples of businesses who are shifting their attitudes from selling to serving across 3 specific categories. We're going to start by talking about clear communication, how this helps you connect with these busy customers, and how clear communication comes from understanding your customer better than anyone else. We'll then talk about new ways to build trust, to gently introduce what you do to your clients, and for you to put yourself on the line before they have to put themselves on the line. And then we'll talk about a new type of relationship that businesses are building with their customers, thinking far more about the long-term and ecosystems that can draw customers in to work with you and keep them there. So, we can start with communication, thinking about all these busy customers who just need to get the right information to make a decision. And again, we can come back to some of these simple, quick wins. Because 89% of buyers say that pricing is important, yet only 57% of them, or rather 57% of them, say that it isn't on websites. So potentially, you could transform your business just by being a bit more transparent and putting your standard pricing on your website. And there are some huge businesses who are doing this. Amazon Web Services, rather, are turning over around $12 billion a year at this point. They're growing at a rate of around 40% a year, and they work with some of the world's biggest companies. So their systems support Netflix, Adobe, Vodafone, General Electric, Pinterest. The list is huge. And also NASA, interestingly. And all of these customers sign up by looking at this simple pricing page, selecting where they are or where they want their server to be, and they can instantly understand what this is going to cost them. And this actually lowers Amazon's cost of sales, of course, because they're automating this whole process through their website. So a question for you is, if this is good enough for NASA, is it also good enough for your clients? Something to think about. Now, clear communication comes from clear messaging. 46% of B2B companies say that they often ditch companies before they fully understand it because the messaging isn't clear. But clear messaging comes from a clear understanding of who your customer is. And that can sometimes be a bit harder to understand than you might think. One company who took a slightly unusual way about getting to know their customers is DriftRock. They're a B2B company that offer lead generation through social media platforms. And it's a slightly unusual concept. They're not just a standard company where they can say, we do this, and everyone instantly gets it. They found that when they launched, they were struggling to really find the right messages, and their website didn't have enough visits to do a proper A/B test. So what they decided to do was launch a pop-up in one of the busiest tube stations in London that is in the heart of London's tech community. And from this, they ran a series of events. It acted as a co-working space during the day. A lot of their office team were based there, so they could meet the walking, talking version of their target customer. And they could see what questions those customers asked about the product, how different messages and benefits resonated with those customers. And from that, they could then define a clear set of messages to then test and improve the performance of their website and all of their other marketing material. This also had another key benefit in that it very quickly boosted the exposure of DriftRock. Because here, this station has almost 500,000 people passing through it each week. And this whole space cost them €1,500 to rent for that time. So that is a much better cost per view, perhaps, than a magazine or Facebook advertising or anything else. And so a few months after this, they went on to raise $1 million worth of funding. So I can't tell you that they're fully related, but surely honing their message in really helped. And once you know who your audience is and truly how to communicate with them, almost anything is possible. And this is actually my favorite example in this presentation. It comes from Milk Group. This is a company that launched 20 years ago by offering photography studios for rent in the meatpacking district in New York. From offering this space, they found that they were spending more time with photographers, and they got to know the creative community more. From that, they moved into launching a fashion week that appealed again to creatives and 20-somethings. Because they were spending so much time with that market, they realized that they understood that very well, so they launched a creative agency to help other brands appeal to this 20-something market. And from there, they realized it would be quite easy to launch a digital platform to rival Vice, so there it is on the screen. They now rent, and they have a casting service, they rent photography and filmmaking equipment to other creative agencies, essentially because they have this understanding of their market. Almost anything, they can do anything they like, really. And they've all in all built a following of 1.5 million customers. And so this means that they can now be very, very creative about what they're doing. They actually sat down about 2 years ago and realized that they understand this 20-something market better than most of the large beauty companies do. And from that, they realized that there was a gap in the market for a new makeup line. So 18 months ago, they launched Milk Makeup, which is quite a quirky brand. They have, interesting packaging. These are actually blotting papers that double as rolling papers. When they launched into 50 Sephora stores. So for a brand new company, that is fantastic. But now they're stocked with 150 Sephora stores and 50 Urban Outfitters stores. So their growth is incredible. They're one of the hottest brands in beauty at this point. And this all comes from this understanding of the customer. But what I love is that their definition of who that customer is so narrowly defined. This is their target customer. They call her the Milk Girl. And their definition of her is a lady who doesn't put on a full face of makeup. Instead, she uses small bits of eyeliner or lip gloss as she wishes, and she applies her makeup one-handed as she rides in taxis around the city, flitting between parties. So this is a very unusual, creative definition of a target customer. And a question for you is, how could you really start to define your customer in ways that move away from demographics and give you a much clearer picture of who your customer is? Now, trust is also a huge part of moving from selling to serving. So we're going to look at how some new companies are gently building trust and helping customers feel supported before this selling function kicks in. Now, familiarity is a very simple way of building trust, and Spreadhouse is a filmmaking agency who are building trust in a slightly more creative way, in that they decided to offer or run a cafe out of the front of their filmmaking office to let people get a little bit of extra exposure to the brand and build familiarity. And of course, this is a form of marketing, essentially, that pays for itself by selling cups of coffee. And there's an interesting relationship between the offline space and the online. Once people spend time in the cafe, they become more likely to follow the brand through their social platforms. They have almost 4,000 followers on Instagram at this point. But people often follow the brand because of the coffee, but then the content on these platforms is all about the films that they're making. So they very gently introduce that concept to customers. And by connecting so many more people with what they do, they really boost the chance of them being recommended throughout the city. And this is important because peer recommendations are actually the most influential form of marketing within B2B. So 80% of B2B decision makers say that they're influenced by peer recommendations. And it's a little bit like imagining there's a attractive lady at a party who you would like to chat up, and you have a choice. You could either go up to her and tell her how cool you are, which may not land so well, or you can get your mate to do it, or her mate to kind of put in a good word for you, and of course that is going to be much more influential. So this is the B2B version of chatting up a hot lady, essentially. Now, Vitamojo are an interesting one. They are building trust through launching a variety of cafes in London. They're cafes with a difference in that customers place their order through an iPad or through a mobile site, which lets them select all the ingredients they want in their meal, and then they can choose the precise quantities that they want. So they can see how all the fat and protein and carb ratios break down and the overall calorie content. So it's fast food, but it's also food that really helps people meet their nutritional goals, essentially. So it's an interesting business on the face of it, but it got far more interesting when I met the founder of Vitamojo, because I said to him, so give me your elevator pitch, tell me what you do. And he said, we are a B2B tech company where our aim is to license our tech to restaurants all over the world. And we're using our restaurants as a Trojan horse, essentially, and a way of building trust, where they want to make sure that all the kinks in their system are ironed out ahead of time, ahead of going out to other clients. So when they go to these clients, they know that their system works perfectly in a live setting and with all sorts of different devices and other Wi-Fi settings and all this technical complexity. And they can also gather their own data from this space, of course. Through this, they can actually put far more people through the space in an hour than a standard restaurant could. And they can go to potential clients with all this wonderful data to say, yep, we now, because of our system, we sold 3 times more than the store next door or what we did without using this tech. So they're essentially proving the model by running their own stores or spaces. Now, you might think, by this point, I'm saying in order to build trust, you have to launch a cafe, but that is not true. I can give you an example of a leading B2C company. Oh, is it like the Oscars? Is it time for me to disappear? We'll see. So yes, Nike are developing a new way of building trust within their new New York store. And this is essentially based on the principle that when they were designing this store, they did a little bit of self-reflection, and they decided that they felt they were the best product brand in the world, but they could raise their game by becoming the best experience brand. And in this store, they've taken a few ideas from Apple's playbook. And this is going back 16 years to when Apple first launched their store. But Apple essentially launched a range of small initiatives that offered things to potential customers without expecting anything in return. And by doing that, almost overnight, Apple became one of the most successful retail spaces in the world. So Nike have taken that concept and reworked it for their own business. And these are some of the aspects that this looks like, or how it comes to life in the store, where when you walk in, it says, if you become a member of our free digital Nike Plus membership program, you can unlock different perks in the store. Those perks some of them are quite simple, things like receipt-free returns. Others are extremely generous in that they say you can buy anything from the store today and go and try it in a live environment for up to 30 days. And if you don't like it, you can bring it back, perhaps falling apart or covered in mud or whatever, and we will give you a full refund. So that is, I think, the most generous returns policy I've ever seen, actually. And they take things even further by letting customers use their Nike Plus profile to book free one-to-ones with assistants in the store. So that could be booking a personal styling session with an assistant, but also you can book a personal trainer to run around Manhattan with you for an hour. So, as I said, this is very generous, but Nike, of course, are one of the most savvy businesses on the planet. They understand that things are getting more competitive in the industry, and they really need to do something different to stand out. And they're working to increase their turnover from $32 billion in 2015 to $50 billion by 2020. So this is just one part of that growth strategy. And the last thing to look at is how businesses are building much richer, longer-term relationships with their customers. And you can better build a relationship when it's based on interaction, rather than you just saying a bunch of things and not being sure how it lands. There are all sorts of different ways for you to get to know your customers and tailor your messages, even if a human doesn't touch the whole system. Metria is one tool that is relatively simple to use. Well, actually very simple to use. You can install it in about 10 minutes, and what it does is it understands what each customer is doing on an individual level. So it moves them from being a member of essentially a dumb email list to understanding how often they open your emails, where else they've interacted with your brand, what they've bought in the past and what they haven't. And this is a whole AI-backed system, essentially. So from this understanding, the system can work out which messages they should send this customer at which particular points in time. And this is a solution that's more for B2C brands at this point in time. But some of the brands that they've worked with have found that their return on investment, rather, has in some cases been 500%, and in other cases been 1,700%. And I think for B2B businesses, the likelihood is that if you use a system like this, your ROI is going to be even higher than that. And there are also systems that can let you understand what customers have done online or over the phone with you in the past. And so then when they perhaps visit a trade stand with you, the people on the trade stand can recognize who that customer is. They can see all of the interaction that's happened up to this point. So the customer doesn't have to start cold and explain who they are. So these tools are some of that way of getting around that 65% of customers who feel frustrated by this inconsistent experience across channels. There are tools to sort this out now. Now, in terms of relationships, we can also go back to Vita Mojo, because they've developed essentially an ecosystem that defines an entirely new relationship with their customers and acts as quite a new point of competitive difference, essentially. So as we've seen, when you order, you can manually choose the precise quantities you want, but they're starting to recommend different meal setups, essentially, for their customers, based on a range of varying sophistications. At this point in time, when you order through the app, it invites you to set up a profile, and you can set your height and your weight, how many meals you eat per day, your activity levels, and the specific fitness goal that you have. And based on that understanding, it can recommend the amount of protein and carbs that you should be having each day. So they're supporting the customer in meeting these long-term fitness and health goals. But they're making this even more sophisticated by integrating with other high-tech services. In that they're currently working to pull in data from the user's Fitbit. So they can see if a customer has had a really active day, then the system can recommend a high-protein meal, perhaps. Or if it can see that they've been just sitting on the couch all day, it might recommend a spear of broccoli to be eaten instead. So it's essentially understanding what the customer is doing without needing much interaction from them to push them further on their way. But things get even better because they have now launched a partnership with DNA Fit, which is one of these home DNA testing kits. So customers can take a swab of their mouth, they send this off to DNA Fit, and they test around 50 different genes to understand how that individual's body reacts to food and nutrition across about 20 different categories. So they can understand how the user responds to salt or caffeine, carbohydrates and saturated fats, the level of antioxidants that they should be having, and omega-3. So through this system, as I said, this offers a real point of competitive difference, because through this system, the choice is no longer about whether to have a salad for lunch or a Subway. It's really about choosing the brand that understands you the most. And the last way to build relationships is to help your customers build relationships with each other. Now, YouTube are going on an interesting jaunt at this point in time, where they've opened up 10 exclusive studios around the world, and people can only get access to this space if they're essentially a business user of YouTube. You have to have 10,000 subscribers or more in order to be able to be granted access to this space, which I looked it up, and on average, you have to be posting regularly for around 2 years to get to 10,000 subscribers. So it's not an easy task, but they make it very attractive by saying you can be part of this exclusive community if you can hit this goal. Once people have hit that goal, they can access free shooting space, free editing space, free events, and free hangout space where they can go on to meet other makers within their city. And I think it's this idea of bringing their community together that differentiates the YouTube brand in a whole new way. Just as it's getting easier for any business to launch, it's also getting easier for any business just to take a few pictures and put them on the side of a bus or a billboard or on Facebook. And so businesses are realizing that they need to do something to raise their game and stand out, and building a community is the perfect way to do that. Because essentially, it turns the brand from this flat, two-dimensional thing into something that is driven by the passion of their members and has this walking, talking, living, breathing quality that can't be replicated in an advert. So to me, this is the ultimate expression of a brand and one of the most important ways that brands are now differentiating themselves. So having had a look at all of these examples, what are the key takeaways for your business? Well, I would like to think that push marketing is dead. It needs to die. It is time. And the reason why it needs to die is that customer expectations are being set by leading businesses who are treating customers in a whole new way. They're being really generous with them, they're treating them with respect, and they're making sure that they are being useful to them. And perhaps a simple way of expressing this change is to describe the old way of doing things as a head teacher, perhaps, broadcasting their message daily through the school tannoy system and not really understanding whether the kids are listening or whether they're engaged or not, but just standing there and saying their message. Whereas I think now leading brands are taking that top-down system and flipping things on their side to become more of a big sister type role, or rather a lovely big sister who advises, gets to know who they're helping, and advises and supports them on a journey, and does so out of wanting the best for the other party rather than really wanting something for themselves. So perhaps you can ask yourself, which would you describe yourself more as at this point? Are you the head teacher or are you the big sister? And which would you rather be? And which does it pay more to be like? And if you do want to be more like the big sister, you can serve your customers better when you understand them better. And this better understanding comes from a laser-like focus on who your customer is. So instead of, well, if I asked you who your target customer was, most people would just say most of the people in this picture, essentially. But perhaps the better thing to do is to define your customer as one person to start with, and to actually spend time with the living, breathing version of that person, getting to know them, not just how they buy from businesses like yours, but what makes them tick as a human, essentially. And I think you'll find that once you get to know that person really, really well, and you can offer things that really connect with that person, your appeal will actually widen to most of the people who are in this image. The last thing to ask yourself is, which B2B and B2C companies would you like to become more like. Because if you just look to your competitors, essentially you're never going to surpass them. This leading inspiration is coming from all over the planet, from all sorts of different industries. And some of the ways you can get ahead are by really connecting with your audience and building a following. So you can launch anything and it will go on to be a success. You can make a success of things by offering things to your customer genuinely without any expectation of what you might get in return. You can start to build an ecosystem that will encourage customers to build this long-term relationship with you based around them achieving their goals. That acts as this key point of differentiation. And you can also get ahead by building these communities to act as this key point of differentiation and bring your brand to life in a whole new way. But ultimately, the thing to think about is how you can truly move from selling to serving. Because if you can fully put your customer first, that's when your business will take the lead. Thank you very much.